You don't need flowers. You just need someone at the funeral. Those 9 words spoken by a 91-year-old widow to a table full of Hell's Angels in a forgotten Montana diner would trigger the most extraordinary funeral procession America had ever witnessed. What happened next wasn't just a story about bikers showing up. It was about 500 men dropping everything, riding through 3-day storms, canceling family obligations, and crossing state lines because one terrified old woman was about to bury her husband of 72 years in complete silence. But before we dive into how those leather-clad strangers became her family, make sure you subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. You want to see just how far Evelyn's story travels. And stay with me until the very end because what arrives in her mailbox weeks later will absolutely shatter you. Evelyn Harper's hands wouldn't stop shaking as she pushed open the glass door of the Copper Ridge Diner. The November wind bit through her thin cardigan, but that wasn't why she trembled. Inside her coat pocket, folded into a tight square, was the funeral director's estimate, $3,200 for a service almost nobody would attend. The diner smelled like burnt coffee and decades of grease. Evelyn hadn't eaten in those days, couldn't. Every time she tried, she'd see Frank's empty chair at their kitchen table, his reading glasses still sitting on yesterday's newspaper, and her throat would close up completely. She'd lived in this town for 68 years, raised a son here, buried him here, though, back in 1987 when he was only 43. Cancer took him the same year Frank's factory closed down. After that, people started leaving. The young ones first, chasing jobs in bigger cities, then the old friends, one funeral at a time. Now it was just her, and Frank's casket, and a church that would echo with emptiness. The funeral director, Mr. Peterson, had tried to be gentle about it yesterday morning. Mrs. Harper, I've made the calls, sent the notices. I'm getting very few confirmations. How few? She'd asked. Eddie looked down at his clipboard. 2, ma'am. Your neighbor, Mrs. Chin, and possibly the pastor's wife. 2 people. For a man who'd spent 72 years loving her, who'd rebuilt engines for half the town back when they couldn't afford mechanics, who'd stayed up nights helping neighbors fix their radios and lawn mowers and refrigerators without ever asking for a dime. That's when something cracked inside Evelyn's chest. She couldn't let Frank disappear like he'd never mattered. She couldn't stand at his grave with 2 people and pretend that was enough. She couldn't let the world forget him that easily. So, she'd put on her church coat, the navy blue one Frank always said made her eyes look pretty, and she'd walk the 4 blocks to the Copper Ridge Diner where she'd heard the bikers stop for coffee every Tuesday morning. The Hells Angels had been coming through town for years. Most locals avoided them. Crossed the street when the motorcycles rumbled past, locked their car doors. Evelyn had never paid much attention either way. She figured people were people, and judging by leather jackets seemed as silly as judging by anything else. But now she needed them. Needed anyone who might fill a church pew, anyone who might make Frank's goodbye feel less like an erasure. 8 bikers sat at the corner booth. Leather cuts draped over broad shoulders, tattoos running up forearms, beards thick and gray-streaked. The biggest one had his back to her, shoulders wide enough to block out the window behind him. The others were laughing about something, their voices rough and loud, the kind of laughter that came from men who'd seen too much and survived it anyway. Evelyn's heart hammered. Her fingers clutched her purse strap so tight they ached. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around, to leave, to not bother these men who probably had better things to do than humor a desperate old widow. But then she thought about Frank's casket sitting in that funeral home, about the empty church pews, about Mr. Peterson's pitying expression, and she forced her feet forward. One step, then another, then she was standing right beside their table. The conversation died instantly. 8 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Nobody spoke. The entire diner seemed to hold its breath. The big one, the one with his back to her, slowly turned his head. His face was weathered, scarred along the left cheek, eyes pale blue and sharp. He had the look of someone who'd done violence and survived violence and wouldn't think twice about either. "Ma'am." His voice was surprisingly soft. "Careful." Evelyn's rehearsed speech evaporated. All the sentences she'd practiced on the walkover gone. What came out instead was raw and broken. "My husband died. Her voice cracked. His funeral's Thursday. Nobody's coming. The blue-eyed biker's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his gaze. The others shifted in their seats. One of them, Jangir, with a red bandana tied around his head, started to say something, but the big one raised a hand slightly and the words died. "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, and it didn't sound like a platitude. It sounded like he meant it. "I don't need money," Evelyn continued, her words tumbling out now, desperate and unfiltered. "I don't need flowers or casseroles or people telling me he's in a better place." He used. Her voice broke completely. She had to stop, force air into her lungs, try again. "I just need someone at the funeral. You can't let him leave this world alone. You can't." Silence stretched between them. Somewhere behind the counter, a plate clattered. The waitress pretended not to watch while obviously watching. The big biker studied Evelyn's face for a long moment. Then he did something she didn't expect. He stood up. All 6 feet 4 inches of him, rising slowly like a mountain taking shape. The other bikers stood, tall. A unified movement that should have been threatening, but somehow wasn't. "What's your name, ma'am?" he asked. "Evelyn. Evelyn Harper. I'm Rex Callahan. People call me Grim." He extended a massive hand. Evelyn shook it, her small fingers disappearing into his calloused palm. "And your husband's name?" "Frank. Frank Harper." Green nodded slowly. "Frank Harper. When's the service?" "Thursday. Dos. The First Methodist Church. We know where it is." Green glanced at his crew. Something passed between them, some unspoken communication Evelyn couldn't read. Then he looked back at her. "We'll be there, Mrs. Harper." "You will?" The relief hit her so hard she nearly sobbed. "You'll really come?" "Yes, ma'am. All of us." "Thank you." The words felt pathetically inadequate. "Thank you so much. You don't know what this means." Mrs. Harper. Grimm's voice was gentle, but firm. "Go home. Get some rest. We'll handle this." Evelyn wanted to ask what he meant by handle this. Wanted to make sure he understood she just needed bodies and pews, nothing fancy, nothing complicated. But exhaustion crashed over her suddenly, 2 days without sleep catching up all at once. "Thursday," she repeated. "Dos. We'll be there." She turned to leave, legs unsteady, vision blurring with tears she'd been holding back for days. Behind her she heard the scrape of chairs as the bikers sat back down. Heard their voices drop to urgent whispers. Heard Grim say something about making calls. But she didn't stay to listen. She pushed back out into the cold November air and started the walk home, still shaking, but somehow lighter. 8 people would be there. 8 was better than 2. Frank would have 8 strangers honor his goodbye. It wasn't much. But it was something. What Evelyn didn't know was that the moment that diner door closed behind her, Rex Callahan pulled out his phone. He opened a group message and typed. 91-year-old widow. Husband's funeral Thursday. No family. No friends. She asked us to show up because she can't let him leave alone. Then he added. Anyone who can ride, rides. He hit send. Within minutes, phones began vibrating across the country. In Texas. Nevada. Arizona. Colorado. California. Montana. The message traveled farther than Grim had ever imagined. By Wednesday night, riders were already on highways. Some canceled work. Some rearranged family plans. Some rode through rain. Others rode through freezing wind. They didn't know Frank Harper. But they understood Evelyn. They understood the terrible silence that follows when the last person who remembers your best years is gone. By Thursday morning, Grim's phone showed 387 confirmed riders. Ten 421. Ten 468. At 11:43 de la mañana, the number reached 512. Grim stared at the screen. 512, he whispered. Spy there looked over. She has no idea. Good. Why? Because I want her to see what her simple request meant. Across town, Evelyn was preparing for the funeral. She wore the black dress she'd worn when their son died. Around her neck was the pearl necklace Frank had given her on their 50th anniversary. She stood in front of the mirror and whispered, "Are you ready, sweetheart?" Of course, the room didn't answer. At 1:15, her phone rang. It was Mr. Peterson, the funeral director. Mrs. Harper, I think you should come as soon as possible. Why? Has something happened? A pause. There's a gathering outside the church. What kind of gathering? Another pause. Just come and see. When Evelyn arrived 3 blocks away, she heard it before she saw it. A deep rumble. Then another. Then hundreds more. The sound rolled through the streets like thunder. She stepped out of the taxi. And froze. Motorcycles filled the road. Hundreds of them. Rows and rows stretching farther than she could see. Evelyn covered her mouth with both hands. No. She began walking. Slowly. Every step brought another rider into view. Men stood beside their motorcycles in silence. Some were young. Some were old. Some had gray hair and walking canes. One rider removed his helmet as she approached. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, hundreds of men were standing bareheaded in the cold. Green stepped forward. Mrs. Harper. She stared at him. I asked for 8. I know. How many? Green swallowed. 512. Her knees weakened. Green caught her before she fell. Easy. She started crying. Not the quiet tears she'd cried alone in her kitchen. These were deep, uncontrollable sobs. Why would you do this for him? Green looked toward the church. Because everyone deserves someone standing beside them at the end. Then he added quietly. And because Frank Harper mattered. Evelyn looked confused. You didn't know him? No. Then how could he matter? Green smiled sadly. Because you loved him. That sentence broke her completely. The church doors opened. The riders began walking inside. Not shouting. Not revving engines. Not making a spectacle. They entered quietly, row after row, filling every empty pew. The pastor stood at the front with tears already in his eyes. He had expected an almost empty church. Instead, he saw hundreds of strangers standing together. When Evelyn entered, every man stood. She stopped. Her hand went to her mouth. Frank's funeral was no longer empty. It was overflowing. The pastor began speaking about Frank. He talked about the mechanic who fixed broken engines for free. The neighbor who shoveled snow from elderly people's driveways. The man who once drove 40 miles in a blizzard to repair a heater for a family with 3 children. Evelyn listened. She knew those stories. But she didn't know how many people remembered them. Then something unexpected happened. A young writer named Marcus walked to the microphone. I never met Frank, he said. His voice shook. But I heard what kind of man he was. He looked at Evelyn. And I heard that he never charged people who couldn't afford to pay. Evelyn nodded. Marcus continued. That's the kind of man worth remembering. Then an older Vietnam veteran stood. Then a father who had lost his daughter. Then a mechanic from Colorado who said Frank had once helped his father decades earlier. One by one, strangers revealed that Frank's kindness had traveled farther than Evelyn ever realized. He hadn't been forgotten. He had simply never known how many lives he'd touched. After the service, the riders formed 2 long lines outside the church. Evelyn walked between them. Every man lowered his head. Some saluted. Some placed a hand over their heart. And when Frank's casket was carried outside, the engine started. One by one. Then hundreds together. The sound shook the entire town. But Evelyn didn't hear noise. She heard a goodbye. At the cemetery, Grim stood beside her. The wind moved through the trees. The casket was lowered. Evelyn held onto Grim's arm. I thought nobody would come. Grim looked at the hundreds gathered behind them. You were wrong. She smiled through her tears. Thank you. Grim shook his head. Don't thank us. Then what should I do? Remember that you're not alone anymore. Weeks passed. Evelyn returned to her quiet house. Frank's chair remained empty. His glasses still sat on the table. Grief didn't disappear just because strangers had shown up. But something had changed. She no longer felt invisible. Then, one cold December morning, the mail arrived. There was a large envelope. No return address. Evelyn opened it. Inside there was a photograph. Hundreds of bikers standing outside the church. And on the back were handwritten words. Frank Harper was loved by one woman for 72 years. For one day, he was loved by all of us. Underneath were hundreds of signatures. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table. She pressed the photograph against her chest. Then she noticed something else. A smaller envelope. Inside there was a check. 3,200 pesos. The exact amount of the funeral bill. But that wasn't what shattered her. Attached was a note from Grim. We heard you were worried about the cost. Consider the funeral paid. You asked us for someone to stand beside Frank. We got that part right. Now let us make sure you don't have to face the rest of this alone. Evelyn began sobbing. She looked toward Frank's empty chair. For the first time since his death, she smiled. Frank, she whispered. You really did have friends. And somewhere far beyond that little Montana town, motorcycles were already starting again. Because the story didn't end at the cemetery. Every Christmas after that, Evelyn received a package. Sometimes it contained flowers. Sometimes photographs. Sometimes handwritten letters from writers she'd never met. But every letter said the same thing in different words. You are not alone. And the following spring, 512 motorcycles returned to Copper Ridge. They didn't come for a funeral this time. They came for Evelyn. She stood outside the diner, wearing Frank's old navy coat, tears running down her cheeks as the motorcycles rolled into town. Green parked in front of her. He removed his helmet. Morning, Mrs. Harper. Evelyn smiled. You're late. Green laughed. Traffic. She shook her head. Then she opened her arms. And the woman who had once walked into a diner begging 8 strangers to attend a funeral was suddenly surrounded by hundreds of people who had become something she never expected. Family. Not because they shared blood. But because, when she needed someone, they showed up. And sometimes, that's what family really means. Not who remembers your birthday. Not who shares your last name. Not who promises they'll be there. It's who actually comes when the world gets quiet. Who stands beside you when the chairs are empty? Who stays when everyone else leaves? Evelyn had asked for 8 people. 512 answered. And Frank Harper's final goodbye became a reminder that no life is truly forgotten when even one person is willing to remember. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and tell me in the comments. If you were Evelyn, would you ever forget what those 512 writers did for you?